Hi, in this video we're going to talk about how to make a GUI program using the Qt library in the Qt Creator IDE. So GUI stands for Graphical User Interface. This program, Qt Creator, is in a graphical user interface. It has buttons that you can press and places you can type stuff. That's as opposed to in a command line environment like this where you have to type everything, commands to get stuff done. So we're going to make a program that has a GUI instead of being run from the command line. We're going to start by making a new project. What type of project is going to be applications? Qt widgets application. Widgets are objects inside of a GUI that you can interact with, like buttons or these links here, or if you can type something in a text box. So we make our Qt widgets application. I'm going to save it with my other projects. Call it practice 02. It gives you the option to generate a form. We'll talk in a later video about what forms are, but for right now we'll uncheck that. And now we have a project. Qt Creator will automatically make some things for us when we choose to make a Qt widgets application. We're going to get rid of the stuff that it automatically made for us. This main window.h and main window.cpp. Let's get rid of those. Close. And the stuff that's in main, let's get rid of that too. We'll do that from scratch. The reason we wanted to make it a Qt widgets application is because it makes your project file different. There's certain things that are in there that you wouldn't get in a plain C++ project. So the first thing to notice is comments in a project file. And after that we'll talk about some other parts of this. So comments in a project file are pound signs. So none of this here is actual code. It's all ignored by Qt Creator. So we can actually get rid of that. We don't need those pound signs. This Qt plus equals is actually telling what parts of the Qt library we want to use in this project. You can see there's core, GUI, and this line says that if we're at the Qt version greater than 4, like for example if you're using Qt version 5, then also throw in widgets into that. So I use Qt 5, so we're using the Qt core, GUI, and widgets sections. If you go to the Qt documentation, you can see that they have a bunch of different modules or different parts to their library. There's core that has the core functionality, GUI, multimedia, network, widgets, SQL for database things. So the Qt library does a lot of things. Right now in our project file, we're just trying to get the core stuff that everything else depends on, and GUI and widgets, because that's what we need to make a graphical user interface. For Qt versions 4 or less, you don't say widgets as a module to include, because all of that widget stuff is actually included in GUI. So that's why this statement looks like it is. It's saying if it's greater than version 4, then you have to say widgets, but if it's 4 or less, then you don't say it. This target thing right here says what the name of your executable program is going to be. If you don't specify a target, it by default makes the name of your executable the same as the name of your project. So you actually don't have to have this line in here. It's going to be practice 2 no matter what. But if you wanted it to have a different name, you could say super program. And then when we build the program, that's what it's going to call it. Template app. This is saying what kind of software we're building with this project. This stands for application. That's as opposed to a library that might be used in somebody else's application. By default, Qt Creator makes applications rather than libraries. So if you want, you can leave this line off as well. But that's what this line says, is that we're building an application. And then the other thing that it shows in here is what files are part of this project. Right now, it only shows one source file, main.cpp. But if we added more files, like other CPP files, those would get included here in this list of sources. And if we added other header files to our project, then that would get added to our list of headers. And we'll see that later on. So as a bare minimum to start building a Qt GUI project, this is what we want in our project file. That's where we're looking right now, in the project file. Okay, so now that we have that in our project file, oh, one other thing that we should talk about. If you want a console in your application for debugging or something like that, if you want something like this to show up, then you need to add another line. That's config plus equals console. And this line will make it so that whenever you run your program, a console like this will show up. If you leave that line out, then it won't give you a console. It'll just give you the GUI program that we're making. So for right now, I'll leave that commented out, but we can bring that back later. So let's look at a really basic Qt GUI project. So again, we need main, as we do with any program. All right, so when we run this, it'll just execute. But every Qt program needs a certain kind of object. That's a Q application. In order to make a Q application, you have to include its header file. So include Q application. There's other types of things called Q GUI application. There's other types of applications in the Qt library. The one that you want is Q application. All right. And then in order to make a Q application object, which we need to do, we say Q application app. Right, so there I made it. And then to run the application, you say app.execute or exec. Right. So if we try to compile this, it'll give us an error because there's one other thing that we're missing, but I just want you to see that because sometimes that shows up. All right. To make a Q application, they want a little bit more information in the constructor. What it actually wants is this information. Now in a previous video we explained what these are. These are command line arguments. In order to make a Q application, you have to give it the command line arguments. And then it'll be happy and run. So here we go. Let's run this program. And it's running. You can't see anything right now because there's no widgets that are visible. But the program is running. The application, when you tell it to execute, starts a loop and just executes until the program is done. And then that loop terminates. So right now I'm going to stop the program by pressing this right here. The last thing before we go on to the next video is to say that when this loop is done executing, it returns a value that that we can return at the end of main. So a lot of times you'll see return app.execute or something like that. So now we have a minimal Qt project. There's no GUI components yet though, but here's our minimal Qt project. Actually, one thing that I'm going to add before we start the next video is we're going to add our first component, our first graphical component. So we're going to do a push button. So include, and in Qt they're called Q push buttons. In order to make a Q push button, you just say Q push button, button 1, and then to make it visible you say button 1.show. And then we go into the app executing. So let's see what we see. Here's our button. There's no text on it because we haven't set any text for it yet. You can do that in a couple of ways. You can either do it in the button's constructor, give it the text right away, or you can do it later on using the default constructor. So we use the default constructor. No name is specified yet, but then we say button1 dot set text. Alright, so there's our button. It doesn't do anything yet. In later videos, we'll see how to make this button do something. But for right now, we have a minimal Qt GUI project, and it has a button. Alright, thank you.